Greetings adventurers, and welcome to an EverQuest lore video. I decided to begin my EverQuest lore video series with the history of Norrath. Essentially, I wanted to get to some of the more amazing topics, some unknown, untouched lore of the franchise, and I do plan on doing videos on not just EverQuest, but also EverQuest 2, EverQuest Online Adventures, and other aspects of the franchise that I'll get into at a later date. But we're going to begin with the excerpt that you see on screen. This is taken from the EverQuest Trilogy Manual. Okay, so we're going to begin with a letter. Not a letter, however, but a journal. And this journal is an adventurer that is traveling to the continent of Kunark. And this continent of Kunark was a forgotten, lost continent at the time of this writing. And the author is going to write essentially what was told to him by an Iksar traveling companion, not necessarily traveling with him, but traveling to the continent of Kunark on the same voyage as him. And this Iksar is named Venusk, and he's explaining to him the history of Norrath as his people knows. So we're going to begin with the opening entry of the journal. And the journal is entitled A Weary Traveler's Journal. My companions, warriors, and members of Evil's Bane are sleeping close by as I write. It is our first night on blessedly dry land after a long sea journey. Only a sputtering candle lights this darkened common room for the first inn by the docks in Feronia Vi, as a fresh quill scratches my words on the parchment. We've all sailed a long way from Antonica, following the trail of stories and rumors about an unusual winged beast that swooped down during a battle and carried off Lysel, our sworn companion and the Bane's best swordswoman, in its hooked talons. Weeks ago, we were about to give up on the search when Rallo Zek intervened and sent us a spark of hope in the form of a tall, cloaked visitor. So that's what we were speaking of. We'll continue. He told us that he had heard of others being captured by flying creatures. And he told us we needed to forget about our friend, that she had been taken as a slave to the Ring of Scale on Kunark, and that no slave has ever escaped. Now, the Ring of Scale, when we get into the Kunark lore, is going to be very important. But essentially, they are one faction of dragons that exist on the continent of Kunark. And we'll get into the history of the dragons when we get into their creation. But it's just very important to note, because a lot of fantasy games, all dragons are either essentially all allied, or they're typically like just kind of lone wolf type figures, where each dragon is his own entity. But in the history of EverQuest and in the lore in world of Norrath, the dragons have different factions, much like us human beings and other creatures in humanoids within the world of Norrath. They may be of the same species, but they may not all necessarily share the same political views. So where were we? None of us had ever been to this place, Kunark, but we were encouraged by the fact that Lysel might still be alive. We all agreed, if there was a chance that she lived, there was a chance we could rescue her. Our mysterious friend only shook his head. Then he slipped back the hood of his cloak so that we might see his reptilian face. Now there are different creatures and species on the continent of EverQuest. I said continent, excuse me. On the planet known as EverQuest. And you have, for example, on the continent, you have frogloks, right? So there's these humanoid frogs that run around on the continent of Antonica. So seeing another species is not as shocking, if you will. Talking humanoid animal mixture creatures, that's something that's par for the course in EverQuest. However, this may be the first time they have ever come across what is known as an Iksar, which is this lizard, the race of the lizard of the being who removed his hood. He introduced himself as Venusk and told us he was boarding the Seahawk that evening to sail to Connart. In return for our companionship on the long voyage and payment of his passage, Venusk offered to tell us about his homeland. So he essentially got a free trip back to his home continent for information that they would need or would prove valuable to them in their efforts to have a kind of jump start on this new place, this new continent that they're about to explore. And finally, his tales included much that we already knew. However, so that I would miss nothing, I recorded everything he said. So from here on out in the journal, he's discussing, well, he's basically outlining the words of Venusk, and from the Iksar perspective, how this planet called Norrath came to be, how these beings came to be, how the gods came to be, and what essentially transpired to create the world as the way that it is in their status quo.